What if the integration of your energy could be incorporated into the design of your legacy, whether you are the giver or the receiver? I'd like to welcome Jay Hughes back to the Design Your Legacy podcast this lovely morning. Welcome back, Jay.
I am so happy to be back in your company this morning. Thank you for inviting me.
It is my pleasure. And I had shared with you in the preamble that I have just finished the latest book, The Voice of the Rising Generation, which we're going to have an opportunity to discuss today. And it is a brilliant book. And I hope that the members of the Rising Generation niche in society all around the world will have an opportunity to check this book out, because as you have mentioned, there is a gigantic transfer that is happening in developing countries, and there needs to be a roadmap. So I hope that today's conversation can shed some light on that roadmap. So welcome back.
Thank you.
Okay, well, start out with the first question then. What inspired you to focus this book specifically on the rising generation rather than on just wealth creators and or advisors?
Angelina and our wonderful audience, the first thing I'd like you to understand about why we wrote the book called The Voice of the Rising Generation is that we did not write a book called The Voice of the Next Generation. No one wants to be next. So if one wants to have successful gifts and transfers, that is successful in the life of the person who's receiving it. Let's realize that everyone wants to be rising. Even 50 and 60-year-olds want to be rising. None of us wants to be next. So what we felt was that my co-authors, Keith and Susan, and I, that voice and hearing the voice of the rising generation is the core question, so that we know who they are, so that we know how to help them if they seek our help. Also, this is the future. And as you said in your opening comments, we know today that there'll be between 100 trillion and 120 trillion dollars moving around the world in the next 50 years into two new hands. That abundance grown from the Second World War all over the world will be coming into the hands of who? The rising generation, the millennials, Gen Z, and the alphas that are following. So we're writing to them. We're asking them to have a voice. Who are you? What are you seeking? And how can we help?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that we had chatted about in our preamble this morning was about understanding who the human being is inside of them that
Mm.
gets buried in the silence, which we'll talk about all the forms of silence that show up in a moment. But, and also the question that you had brought up, what are their aspirations, to still ask that question. And, and I think a part of today's conversation is to set the stage on why empowering inheritors is crucial, because if not, if they are, let's say, grasping for air, if they feel like they are standing on ground that's not quite secure and they're reaching for answers, then this is an opportunity then to invite them to read your book as a
Yep.
starting point, so they do not feel the gravity on their shoulders if they don't have a positive role model or they don't know the next step. All right, so I'm going to go on to the next question, which is that you've warned about the burden of expectations, as well as in chapter one, that the many forms of silence. And I wanted to ask, what are some common ways well-meaning families unintentionally silence or diminish the rising generation?
I think it's common the world around that parents have aspirations for their children, which the children do not necessarily share. So if one lives one's life around one's parents' aspirations, while that may be a respectful life, it is not necessarily your life. This is particularly complex in cultures where you have a verticality, such as the Confucian culture of China and East Asia, and the honor culture of South America and the Middle East, where the parental expectations are very often what the children are required in order to prosper, to fulfill. Um, that is a wasted life, I think we could say. Not from an American or a Western perspective. It's a wasted life everywhere because we don't know who that person is. Spending one's life frozen by the black hole of another's creation or another's anticipation or aspiration for you is a failed life. That's the great silent problem is how do I individuate and differentiate and then integrate so I am who I am meant to be while not being disrespectful? Now, how does that work? Oh my goodness, the audience is saying that's a huge question, Mr. Hughes. Oh dear, it's a huge question. And I'm not going to give any simplistic answer. It's incredibly complex because it develops each person's individual spirit is involved. What I would say initially, because we're going to, I think, talk further about this, is discover if you can what your child's aspiration is. Aspiration is a remarkable word because it's Latin. It's pure Latin, ad, spiratu, spirit, to breath. Every human being has aspirations. I say that because I've been asking human beings for 25 years all over the world, what's your aspiration? Taxi drivers, maids, anybody I met, every human being has an aspiration. If I know your aspiration, then I can test whether that is your aspiration by seeing if it inspires you in spirit. And then do you perspire like crazy to bring it to life? So, spirit, of course, it's a spiritual question. Who are you? What is your reason for being in this lifetime? And what can I do to enable that part of you to come to life? And that doesn't require you to be disrespectful to me. It rather asks, how can I help you rise and speak your voice and have a great life?
Yes. On page 18 of your book, under the headline of talking about silence, you wrote, there are many ways that this silence can express itself. It can even be quite eloquent. And I thought that that was giving great language into when you walk into a room and you know something is going on, but it's so eloquent that you're not quite sure to call it out or name it.
Oh, you're so kind to pick that up. You know, the Chinese have a wonderful saying that he whose mouth is open catches the most flies. Listening, who are you? And the silence can be so wonderful because it's the silence of creation. It's the silence of all the good things going on. Now, it can also be silent because you silenced me. Oh boy. To take someone's voice, Angelina, is also in a an Asian context, but I think it's true in the West as well. If I take your voice, I took your face. Oh, wow. I made you a ghost. Oh dear. Really? Yes, if I take your voice, I took your face. If I take your face, I make you a ghost. How can that be creative and helpful to the longevity and flourishing of a human being and a flourishing family and a flourishing society? It's the antithesis.
Well, I think it's a blind spot, and I'm just going to read out a couple of sections. I'm obviously not going to give away your book, but there's a couple of different categories. You talked about the very good steward, the meteor, froggy, froggy being when someone is in finds himself in that metaphor of the frog in the pot of warm water as the temperature increases.
Right,
The next category, the fourth category, is the parallel universe. The fifth, the anxious heir, spelled Heir. Next, Mr.
right.
Reputable, and then the grand giver. So there's six ways to Sunday that somebody could find themselves in that silence. And like you had
Yes.
said, they can fall through the cracks and it could be so quiet and no one dare speak it. And that's why I said to you in our preamble that I thought you gave the utmost respect to the rising generation to meet them where they are at.
Yes. And And isn't that where curiosity about each other has a chance to come to life? And here's the wonderful thing about if we do it that way, we play. One of the great philosophers of the middle of the 20th century um, wrote a book called Homo Ludens, Ludens, which means man at play, philosophically, rather than Homo Faber, man the toolmaker. His name was Huizinga. Don't worry about it. The audience does not read this book. But what he said is that what epitomizes and identifies our species is that we play. And then the play is the creativity of our species. So if we're not playing, we're not being human. Ah, says Heisinger and Hughes. That's really interesting. Play. Yes, but very important play, complex play. So who are you? How do we play together? If I don't know who you are, we can't play.
Yes, and in this book also you talk about how to create and find really good relationships, which is later
Yes,
on in the book when you spoke
yes,
about the value of work and the benefit to
yes.
others. And also, I think it was three or four different qualities regarding how to create that great play, that great relationship. Because sometimes people don't know. They're expected to know, they want to know.
Ah, yes. And they probably do know innately. That is that they could find it, but the daily issues of life and also their own aspirations get in the way of discovering those qualities. Again, listening. Who are you? Uh, do you know how to love, as Freud said? Not loving. Can do you know learn to love? Oh, that's an interesting question to talk about. And then work, as you mentioned. Are you doing your vocational vocare, your called work, or are you doing labore? Help me. No, because then if I know that you're doing what you're called to do, and that's hard to discover, that doesn't just happen, then I'm almost certainly going to be able to make great gifts to you because I will know how to merge into your learning to love and your learning to work. So who are you?
Yes.
And by the way, in the meantime, maybe I can help you learn who I am, not as your parent or your grandparent, but who I actually am. Oh, that would be very interesting for the rising generation to know. I'll illustrate this. So, Angelina, when from time to time when I was practicing, a family would ask me to come to their meeting. And let's, for the moment, assume this is a family with a founder who's a man. We'll make it a man. It could be a woman, but we'll make it a man for the moment. And he says to me, creating the agenda, well, what agenda should we have? And he wants to have an agenda about books, about his money and his company. No, fine. This is of no interest to the rising generation. It's interesting to him. So is he going to come and make a speech, or is he going to come and have a relationship? This is the core question you asked. So I would say, well, here's what you want. You want a half an hour to three-quarters of an hour only with the grandchildren. The parents can't come, just the grandchildren. Um, and you're going to tell them stories. Now he's getting pale. He's getting anxious. What do you mean? I tell them my grandchildren's story. So yeah. Well, what about? And said they want to know if you were ever 10 years old. What? Yes. They want to know if you were ever 10 years old. Were you ever them? Not some 70-year-old colossus. Of course that's what they want to know, right? Now you can have a conversation because we reveal who we are.
Well, that a patriarch gets to be human, relatable, down to earth.
Who he is.
Yeah.
By the way, another great question for those sessions to Grandpa is, did you ever have a mentor? Because again, this person appears to the rising generation as a colossus, right? Of enormous success, took energy, turned it into matter, huge financial fortune. Was he ever vulnerable? Was there anybody who took an interest in him? It's a wonderful question, isn't it? Because that's the question of the rising generation. Do you have mentors? Do you know you have people in your life who are interested in you becoming you?
Mm, that's more valuable than gold or asset management.
Well, it's how it works in human life. It's how it's always worked. Every successful tribe is, if one thinks about it, no more than a successful stages of life set of relationships that enable the continuity of that human community. So what do the elders do? The elders are looking at the rising generation. Who are you? How can you fit in the tribe? What role can you play? Social anthropology, social psychology. I mean, we know all these things, but we don't practice them.
Good point. Point well taken. In your book, you challenge the idea of succession and instead speak of one's personal journey. And I know that you brought up Telemachus, which is from Greek mythology. So some of these topics that we're bringing up today and in your book are age old, and yet they need to be revisited because, like I had shared with you in the preamble, it had been since my freshman year in 1997 when I think back to Odysseus and the Greek literature that was required reading in college. So,
Yeah.
how does this shift from succession to personal journey benefit inheritors spiritually as well as psychologically?
Well, let's remind ourselves of the Telemachus story because most of us know it, but we haven't thought about it in a long time. And by the way, the Odyssey begins not with Odysseus trying to get back home from the Trojan War. And no, it begins with his son Telemachus on a beach. Telemachus is a 17 or 18-year-old boy. His mother has got 20 suitors, if you remember the story. His father's been away almost all of his developing life, and he's he's pretty much useless. Doesn't have any idea who he is. He doesn't know what's going on. So his likely success in life is pretty low. So what happens? He's on this beach, and this old man with a stake, comes bent over, comes walking down the beach, and notices him and begins a conversation with Telemachus. And what we know, but Telemachus does not know, is that inside that role being played by this old man called Mentor, by the way, that's what he's called, is actually Athena, the goddess of wisdom, was his father's great protector and will become his great protector. But she's too big for him. So he needs the old man because she's too big for him. But she says, who are you? What are you doing? He says, I don't know. I don't know. She says, Telemachus, you need to get to work on who you are and the journey of your life. And that's the sum and substance of their conversation. And so he begins the journey of his life. Who am I? How do I get into the Odyssey? What is my role? Now, it's very interesting the way that the book works, though. So I'll add this. At the end of the book, it's not Telemachus, although he has discovered who he is and becomes a man. It's now Odysseus as a very old man who's come home safely, Ulysses and Odysseus. He's killed all the suitors. He's going to have a quiet life. So now it's the old age. You see the stages of life that the Odyssey is talking about? And now as an old man. And he thinks life's going to be quiet. And now Athena shows up again. She says, Odysseus, your life's not done. Oh, he said, I've killed all the suitors. I'm home. I've had all these adventures. She said, no, you now need to go on the adventure of the last stage of your life. Who are you in this stage of your life? So he picks up an oar, that's sort of going to rowing, but puts it on his shoulder and he walks off into the distance. Again, Athena coming and asking him the core question of that stage of life. Who are you? Who are you becoming? And then who will you be? Isn't it wonderful developmentally? Just so right for how human beings develop and evolve. But you need Athena. Now, we're not all going to find Athena, no. But don't we need mentors? Don't we need someone who comes and asks us the questions? And then comes the even more important point. Are we awake to hear the question? Oh, so there's preparation for Telemachus. The first question isn't you need to find out who you are. The first questions are more gentle. They open up his consciousness to the great question that Athena is going to ask him. Who are you and are you ready for the journey of your life? Or ask Odysseus, who are you? So one of the arts of our world is to have mentors who ask us the right questions. But we have to be prepared to listen. And then we have a voice. Now the rising generation is discovering its voice.
Well, I think it's a wonderful dialogue. So if the mentor asks the question, then it demands a good answer. And then the rising gen needs to rise to the occasion.
Right. And let's add one thing. There's an old saying that the teacher is ready. When the student is ready, the teacher will appear. Okay, well, I'm going to change it to say when the mentoree is ready, the mentor will appear. But then comes the even more important part of that relationship. When the student is ready, the mentor will disappear. And in both cases, Athena disappears. Ah, this is the art of mentorship. It's not to stay around after you've asked the question that relationship is designed for you to ask. And then step aside. Let someone else move to the in for the next stage of life. Then you might have a good life. You're finding people really care about you, ask you the right questions for that stage of life.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're happiest when we're growing.
Mm,
Yeah,
yeah, very important.
very nice. So you emphasize the importance of inner voice and identity formation when it comes to the rising generation all around the world. Why is discovering one's own voice such a vital part of one's legacy, as well as planning one's legacy?
Well, let's look at the community that we are likely to be speaking to, and this community around the world will be receivers. Um, Receiving is very difficult. So just because somebody sends something out into space, what I call a meteor that we wrote about in Cycle of the Gift, and has your name on it, and you receive it, you haven't received it because you haven't integrated it. It just smashed into you. So the audience that we're speaking to, I feel today all over the world, are the receivers in the next 50 years of this 100 trillion to 120 trillion dollar um, transition and transfer. Why does it matter that they receive well? Well, first, it matters tremendously to the rest of their lives. Who will they be with this meteor inside them? So let's remember the meteor has nothing to do with them at all. Somebody else took energy and made it matter. We talked about that the last time. That's the action of a founding generation, or maybe the second, whatever it may be. what they're receiving is that a piece of that matter. And the question of receiving it is very complicated. It doesn't just, oh, fine, I'm done. I'm continue my life. It doesn't work that way. Because what you're receiving is not only matter, it's you're receiving a relationship. What's in the meteor is not simply money or a house or something. No, you're receiving a relationship that's in of the intention of the sender of that meteor, and that may or may not be a positive experience, depending on what your relationship was to that person. So integration is very complicated. Now, why is this so important? And the question you ask, well, I'm going to speak for a moment as a member of the world society. I want you to have a successful reception and integration. Because if you do, you will then be a flourishing human being. And in turn will create a flourishing family, which in turn will be a building block of a flourishing society. If you have a poor reception, a failed integration, then you're going to be not only for yourself a very sad person, but you are not going to flourish. You're not going to create a flourishing family, and you're not going to be a building block of a flourishing society. Um, Angelina, if we look back through history, literature, plays, dramas, different things that we receive from the past, we know the stories of Edsel Ford as an example. What am I bringing in? Well, Edsel Ford was the eldest child of Henry Ford. And you see a picture of Edsel Ford as a child, healthy, not fat, but robust. When he died, he was thin and emaciated and died of a disease. His father destroyed him, took all of his energy. So all these transfers to the eldest son of what was one of the most valuable companies in the world and killed him. So I could give 100 stories, but not in this interview. But the problem is we don't, none of us as a member of society or that human being want that outcome. However, we know that integrating something that is alien to us, that is a meteor, with somebody else's relationship and somebody else's matter coming into our lives is an incredibly complicated thing to integrate successfully. So, in answering your question, say it again, as a citizen of the world with children and grandchildren, I want everybody in the world who receives a piece of the one of these meteors that's a piece of this 100 trillion to transfer to have a successful integration, to be a successful rising generation member of his or her family because he or she has individuated with that meteor. They rise, create a flourishing family, and in turn are a building block of a flourishing society. And I want that for them individually as a matter of my spiritual goals for them. But I also want to be selfish in the sense that I want them to be successful so that we have a world that works.
Well, absolutely. I think that to be born into privilege also has some heavy responsibilities and expectations in navigating not just one's own growth, but also the personalities that are around them. And one of the things I said to you also in our preamble is that this book really offers hope in breaking through that silence.
Well, that's why we wrote it. We're writing it to try to give people all over the world a chance by understanding how this works and saying, look, this is rocket science. This is not, I'm not going to say this isn't, no, this is as complex an issue as anything that any human being faces. And here's one of the problems. Does anyone really care If a person of privilege has a good or bad life, not much.
Because there's a little bit of resentment if they're rich
Oh,
and they have the big red fire
envy.
truck.
Oh, the sin of envy. Yes. Oh, envy is one of the seven great sins. And do we gossip? Of course we do. We're human beings. And who do we gossip about? Well, people like this. And what do we love? Schadenfreude. Oh, that's a wonderful word, a German word that means somebody is suffering and we love it. That's Schadenfreude. Isn't it a fabulous word? I won't spell it, but it's a wonderful word. Oh, we gossip about that. So here's little Johnny or little Sally from a family of privilege acting horrifically. Paris Hilton 25 years ago. I don't know Paris Hilton, and I'm not knocking on her, but 25 years ago, it was a terrible thing to see that poor woman didn't have any guidance at all, just wandering. Or Jamie Johnson's great book, great video about the people that he interviewed. Oh, dear, I'm in that movie at the very, very beginning, by the way, because of the mentoring role. But Jamie's film is wonderful. Well, it's not wonderful. It's sad.
Well, it's honest. I think it was called the 1%.
Yes, it's absolutely honest. Jamie did a really great gift, in my view, made a great gift to the world by interviewing very thoughtful people about their circumstances, and they told the truth, just as you said. So, no, but we want all human spirits to flourish, and we don't want them to suffer. And suffering in my world is illusion, not pain. Just ask our audience to think about that. Real suffering is illusion. You suffer from illusion. Now, that doesn't not mean you or I will discover the pure truth or the perfect clarity. No, it's not given to us. But we can ask ourselves very carefully, am I an illusion? And am I suffering because of the illusion? And I think that one of the things that we can see in families of privilege is the expectations for the rising generation are likely to be unfulfillable from the earlier generations, goals for them, coming back to where we started this morning. That's a very dangerous thing to have goals for someone else. Very dangerous because it's probably an illusion about who they are. Now the person receiving those illusions about who they're supposed to be are completely confused. Another illusion about who I'm supposed to be when I'm not that. So who am I? Ah, maybe there you can penetrate the illusion a little bit on both sides.
Yeah, I think it's brilliant then to break pattern because it's for the best of all parties. I was going to bring up that it appears your book was published per the copyright in 2014. So then you would have just missed Paris Hilton, even though she came out with her documentary later on of having to had gone to boarding schools in Colorado and so forth. She really needed a mentor at that.
Oh,
Yeah,
desperately. Or
yeah.
Patty Hearst, the generation before that. Again, I don't know Miss Hearst, so I'm not being disrespectful. I only know what was in the evident in the world.
Yeah, I want to read something regarding the externals before I go on to the next question. This is in the chapter called Self-Knowledge, and it's talking about strengths and hurdles um, and the so it's underneath the external, the things that influence someone. It could be geography, demographics, social life, financial wealth. But in family, I thought this was, and this might be a little bit of a button to any of the listeners, but underneath family, it raised three questions. Are your parents able to separate out their need for connection from their desire to care? Because sometimes a member of the rising generation cannot criticize their parents. That's not allowed. And on top of that, they, in terms of boundaries, compared to enmeshment, the second question that gets raised is, do they see you, the parents, do the parents see you as an individual or an extension of themselves? And sometimes very successful founders and entrepreneurs can have narcissistic tendencies where then their children are seen as extensions of themselves. And then the third question is, do they present you with an example of calm and centeredness? And so sometimes the rising generation may have to outgrow their parents in certain ways.
Well, this is the trap. This is a trap. Um, I'm going to say something very odd to the parents, but it's also helpful sometimes. There's a concept in Buddhism, and I think to some extent in science, and it's epigenetics, it may be one way to look at it, um, where the child's spirit, which is eternal, in this particular moment, before it comes to life, this lifetime, not asking anybody to believe this, I'm just using it as a metaphor. Just before it comes to life in this lifetime, it is attracted by its parents and decides to choose those parents for the next lifetime. I find that wonderfully fascinating. Now, where it's very helpful, ducking a little bit the question, but I'll come back to it, is when the child is acting really badly, the parents can say, look, you chose me. I'm not the problem. You chose me. You're the problem. Whoa, mom, that's not fair. Well, that may not be fair, but you think about that. Who's at risk? Who's at fault here? Okay. What I think is so wonderful in the section that you quoted here, and it was great joy writing it, is to recognize that we all have ambitions and aspirations for our children. As some of the great authors have said, often asking our children to solve the problems in their lives that we didn't and weren't able to solve in ours. Oh, wow. Watch out for that one. That is a big one. And it is common. It's common. It's not just unusual. Um, so those aspirations are not necessarily bad. I want to make that very clear, the aspirations we have for our children. What is most important about those aspirations is that they include the question of who is this spirit independent of me as parent? Who showed up in my life this time? And who are you? Oh my goodness. And every parent I've ever interviewed, including myself and my first wife, were amazed in the three children we produced together, not only how different they are, but how incredibly individual they are. And do we have aspirations for them? Sure, of course we do. But mostly we could funnel those aspirations to who that person's spirit actually is who showed up. Well, you guess what? If you do that, you get better outcome of what you want. The problem is they are not you. You are a spirit. You too are spirits. You create this, but comes this spirit who joins you. Who are they? And if you impose, which we all do to some extent, our aspirations for them at the expense of finding out who they are, we will just be disappointed. It's a fool's game, but we all play it. I'm not being the least unclear. I played that game. It's just a loser's game. Whereas playing a different game, that play, coming back to Heisinger, we play as human beings in creative play. if I'm asking myself, why did you choose me? Who are you? How'd you get here? What's your reason in this stage of life for being here? Um, and then comes a really interesting thing in great parent-child relations. Two things that I didn't write about, but I would if I was writing another book. The first is, when do I cease to be your parent? I don't become your friend. I become your fellow journeyer. Oh, what a great moment that is. And then, Angelina, comes the end of life, and I'm 82 and a half. I've been at this 58 years. Keith Whitaker, my co-author, said to me some years ago that there are four stages in human life. The first stage is receiving, without which we wouldn't be able to survive. Then learning to give, then giving. And then he reminded me the fourth stage of life is receiving. That's the stage I'm moving into. How I've dealt with my children, am I their colleague, has everything to do with what I'm going to receive, doesn't it? So, to the parents listening, your best work is preparing for the fourth stage of life when you're going to be receiving again. Think about that very carefully when you try to impose on your child your aspirations for him or her. They're probably not going to like it. Now, that doesn't mean you don't care. Of course you care. You want them to be safe. You want them to be healthy. You want them to grow. Of course, that's natural. Of course you do. But imposing one's vision on them, you're probably going to reap something you don't want in that fourth stage of life of receiving, right?
Real rebellion can sneak in.
And maybe just good luck, Godspeed, but I'm not coming to visit you. Oh dear. Ouch, ouch, ouch.
Well, there is a better way. How can parents, speaking of parents, as well as advisors and the professionals in this industry, better support inheritors without overpowering or defining those paths for the inheritors? I know I'm circling the wagons again, but
Yeah. Well, I'm going to give a short answer here. All relationships of principal and agents, that is somebody and somebody else, where there's some authority involved, are basically relations of some kind of fides. This is a Roman word, means always faithful. A fiduciary is a term many of our listeners will know, comes right from the Roman fides and actually from an earlier Greek word. Always faithful. So if we are in a relationship of any kind where there is authority involved, the question is then the measurement of the success of that relationship is measured by how much you cared. And then, of course, what did you care about? So if it's a parent or an advisor in an authority position, my first question to them and to me when I'm in that position, which I am as a father and grandfather of many and a friend and counselor and in many different functions, but there's some authority involved. Not power, by the way, authority, different words, meaning very different things. I ask myself, what do I care about in this relationship? And then how do I measure how I did? I think that the most important question over and over and over, Angelina, is the person in that relationship, parent, advisor, etc., in that authority or position of authority, is asking all the time the other person, the recipient of that action, Have I enhanced your life? Pure and simple. Enhance is one of those wonderful words in English that's only positive. Isn't it wonderful? If I enhance something, I made it better. There's no negative aspect to it. It's like affinity. If I have affinity with you, we have a positive connection. It's one of those wonderful words. By the way, that's another question I ask myself in these relationships. Do we have affinity? Not some vertical authority, but is there positive connection between us? So there has to be affinity, and then and I would say one of the measurements of that is did I have I enhanced your life? I think that's a hugely important question. And to make it a little bit of a detail, because I'm trying today to stay open with you to a larger conversation, but just imagine a world where all these meteors, or lots of these meteors, come to the person who receives the problem of reception again and integration in the form of a trust. And lots of these trillions of dollars are going to come in the form of trusts. Okay. Now the recipient has the even greater complexity that they didn't receive a thing, they received a role in a play that they didn't write. Okay, feel that? So where am I going with this? Well, what does the trustee then care about? Now we got a third party. So we have the sender, the transferor, the giver, we have the recipient, but now we have in the play a third party. This person that has authority in a certain sense, the trustee, what does the trustee care about? And Keith and I have just written a paper on the duty of care because a trustee has to care. That's the law as well as the moral reality. And then the question is, what does the trustee care about? And what we've said in this paper, and I'm saying today with you in this interview, is the one thing the trustee must care about is did he, she, it enhance the life of the beneficiary? Not how did they do with the books and records and the investments? No. Did they actually care? And what did they care about? Now, it doesn't mean that they don't need to be careful with the books and records and the investments. But what's the core question of care? Parent, advisor, trustee, any relationship is what is the quality of the outcome? Did I enhance your life? I think is the core qualitative question.
Yeah, so we're back to aspirations.
Yes, right
Yes,
away.
personal
Boom,
development. Yeah,
right back. Yes,
yeah. So what
spirit,
was, yeah, so that inheritor is more than just an ATM machine.
100%. Because otherwise they can say, who am I? Sliced liver or liverwurst? No, I'm a human being. Hey, I've got a voice. I'm rising here. Somebody listen to me, please. Can I, shouting into a system that's built to identify someone else, some other colossus who's dead, but I'm alive. How do I individuate in that system? Who's listening? Where are my mentors? Where are my parents as colleagues? Where are the advisors who are asking, how can I enhance your life?
Yeah. Well, I think that speaks to the next question about making the distinction between mentors as well as managers for the
Yes,
rising
absolutely.
generation members.
Yeah, if I'm in a relationship of responsibility to you, I am always in some way a mentor, even if it's a dependent relationship, even if I'm just keeping books and records. Still, are you learning with me? Am I just providing you a service, or are we learning together as a dyad? Ah, and by the way, the life for the service person is enhanced enormously by the responsibility and respect that creates.
And one of the points that your book also brought up is the number of rising generation members that will find new advisors and not necessarily continue the agreements and contracts with the existing advisors because they want more. They need more.
Yeah, and by the way, it's a real number. About 95% of second and third generation family members use different advisors than their parents did. That isn't because the advisors were poor. It was that the parents' advisors themselves were not interested in new clients. Now, people say, well, Jay, every business is interested in new clients. No, it's not. That's not my experience. And most of the financial services businesses, which are fine, are looking for new customers, not new clients. Ah, customer, I simply provide you a product. Clients, I have to provide you a service. Ah, well, I'm not interested in the life enhancement function. That's fine. You don't need to be. But one thing's for sure, part of the reason that the second and third generation do not use the same advisors is because the people their parents used are not showing that they're interested in enhancing their lives. That's fine. That's again, there's nothing wrong with it. But if a, if a professional organization is interested in having that rising generation stay with them, then here's the interesting thing for them, which isn't the subject particularly of our conversation today, but I'll send it out into the air. Do you have a strategy for retention, not simply a strategy for acquisition? Oh, there's a huge consciousness between those two.
Well, I think it would require the advisor or the professional regarding assets under management, et cetera, to do a little soul searching in order to guide their client in that relationship. I always use the metaphor to the canoe by the lake, if anyone was
Yes,
a Girl Scout or a Boy Scout. And so they would have to also rise to the occasion in their capacity to lead and to connect.
yes, and again, I'm always conscious. I try to say to people, please don't do something you don't that isn't natural to you. And if it's natural to you to be in a business that's about acquisition of customers, then do that. That's the evolutionary action that you're fittest for. If you're interested in retention, not as a slave market, but as an open invitation for a relationship, then you're saying to the potential client, not customer, I am interested in who you are,
Mhm.
not simply what your balance sheet looks like, financial balance sheet.
Yeah, I want to bring up another point from your book before I go on to the seventh question. And the point, and I'm going to go back to the Greek mythology and the island of the lotus flower, because you
Oh,
made a really good distinction regarding how wealth, oftentimes, for those who have experienced wealth, it is such a fragrant experience, and you never want to leave that island. And a
mhm.
part of that growth is to leave behind that island, and in the story with the sailors, there were the lotus eaters, and they literally had to have an outside party pull them away, the three sailors that had eaten the flower, um, and then under the strenuous efforts of Odysseus, had to be removed by force from the island. And you had spoken about with financial wealth, it can cause forgetfulness, forgetfulness of what life is like without the money, forgetfulness of why work is important, forgetfulness of what authentic relationships are like, forgetfulness of one's own dreams or the very possibility of having dreams.
Thank you for reminding me. Let's remind our audience that the island where they were eating lotus was called Lethe, Lethe. This is the root of our word lethargy. Can you feel how heavy, slow, life draining lethargy is? Oh, you can hear it in the word. Good, yeah. Hear that lethargy. Oh, wow. That The Greeks got this one dead right, didn't they? This is death, living death. By the way, without getting into medicalization or PTSD, and I'm not going there, I'm just going to say that one of the forms of PTSD that is most pernicious um, is having the energy of your cells frozen by an act, saving, maybe surviving a car wreck or having a terrible sexual abuse. The tragedy, actually, Angelina, for many, many of the rising generation is that the receipt of the meteor does not lead to integration and differentiation. It leads to freezing. This is why you're asking this question. You can see those men were frozen. And getting that energy unfrozen for many people is either impossible or years of therapy. It's just too big. It's just overwhelming, and it freezes them. By the way, that doesn't mean that they're not nice people. In fact, most of those frozen ones that I've dealt with were very nice people with nice houses and nice cars and nice country clubs and nice schools, but there was nothing going on. They were living a life of lethargy. How tragic.
Let me read one other line. I know I'm interrupting you right now. You wrote on page 86, how hard is it to remember what really matters, to remember your journey if every memory brings you home to the lotus.
There it is. There it is.
And I want to read one other from page 61. Telemachus learns a great deal in his unplanned journey. He develops bravery in the face of danger. Therefore, the journey of personal development is worth it to pursue one's dreams.
He learns the virtue of courage, and not courage in fighting, but courage for himself. He becomes courageous for himself, doesn't he? He practices the Aristotelian virtue of courage. And its most important point, which is to be courageous for his own life. And that's how you get out of lethargy. It's hard, but it's hard.
So that brings me to question number 7 in the window of time that I have with you today. How can members of the rising generation begin to develop that purpose and meaning independent of the family enterprise or wealth?
Um, this is such a complicated question, and we could go on really for hours with all the different techniques that are available. Um, what I can say with some confidence to this question in this venue, the millennials who are now, the oldest is now 44, and Gen Z, the eldest of whom is 30, and now the alphas who are, I don't know, maybe the eldest is 8 years old or something. Um, the millennials and the Gen Z will be the rising generations of this next 50 years who will be the major recipients of these meteors from outer space. And then the alphas, maybe the second tier of those recipients. The millennials and the Gen Z have been saying something to us for years, which I want to say with great sadness and embarrassment as a member of the silent generation, ancient as I am. I didn't hear very well. Um, what have they been saying to us? They've been saying, we won't do anything if it doesn't have impact, by which we mean we have a personal experience.
Mm.
Wow, that's a big knowing. It's a big knowing that that's how they're saying to us we learn. Um, many, many centuries ago, um, at different times over these centuries, wise people about human education said, you learn nothing unless you can experience it. They were right. Absolutely right. So reading about it or hearing about it is not experiencing it. Experiencing something means you got hit by it. Something happened to you, not bad or good. Something happened. You experienced it and you integrate it. Okay. What I would say is the most valuable education is the education the millennials and Gen Z are screaming for. Give me experiences. Give me experiences. Now, that's not easy, but I will give you this image so the listeners can and the viewers can take this in. I am the product of a very small, very unusual, progressive uh, elementary school in New Jersey. I won't name it, but I could, but that's not why I'm using it. My parents were both very interested in progressive education and particularly experiential education, which is the underlying nature of what John Dewey and Mr. Steiner, Waldorf schools, and others were teaching us at the turn of the 20th century. They sent me and my brother and sisters to this school, and the philosophy behind the school of the woman who founded it, and I was in the first grade, was to learn through the arts. So every single day, every child at this school does a performing or fine art every day, nursery school all the way through eighth grade. And the graduation ceremony of the eighth grade is to produce either The Tempest or Midsummer's Night's Dream. They each year they vary. And so my experience was an incredible gift from my parents. Now they didn't have the experiences. I had the experiences, but they provided a venue for me to have such experiences. What I can say is, and this is going to be a bit radical, is I'm very worried about the millennials and the Gen Z going to STEM schools because they don't get experiences. They
Mm.
get information that in theory they can use to get a good job, but doesn't make them who they're meant to be. You become who you're meant to be by the experiences that you accumulate, right?
Well, absolutely. And we're more than robots or more than just productive, quote, members of society that contribute. We also need to be well-rounded human beings that
Yes.
enjoy our five senses and dip our toes in the water for understanding how to sail correctly and starboard and all of that.
Yeah. So Telemachus, what's the question Athena asks? Who are you? Go have experiences, is what she's saying. The experiences you're having here are no use to you.
Mhm.
Your mother's got 20 suitors, your father's away, you don't know. No, get to go, get going, you know, get going, have experiences. So what I would say is to the parents, to the grandparents, the advisors, and to the rising generation members who are listening, if you want to help your millennial or Gen Z or Alpha child or grandchild, give them experiences. Give them experiences.
And it'll be actually good for all of the parties to connect, to share,
What
to
what
bond.
great gifts.
Yeah. And that's
Real
the gift
gifts.
of time. Because
Yes.
yeah, quality time.
Yes. And that
Yeah.
and coming back for a moment to that colossus of industry telling his grandchildren what it was like to be 10 years old. What?
Mhm.
That's that's an experience.
And that'll actually be
Grandpa?
the legacy they carry forward that's alive and heartfelt.
Yes. Yes.
I know I only have so much time with you. If you'd like to breeze through the next few questions, what are the long-term consequences when the rising gen is not given the space to find their own voice? I think they get lost in the silence.
They get lost in silence. They do not individuate. They do not, in this lifetime, advance the growth of their spirits,
Mm.
as we have been discussing. and perhaps spend their lives in three absolutely wasted exercises. One, they receive the meteor and they fight with it by trying to spend it. What a waste. Two, they receive the meteor and they try to flee from it by giving it away. Three, they receive the meteor and are frozen by it. All human tragedies.
The good news is there can be post traumatic growth because you're offering a remedy
Right.
that's very human if they're willing to commit.
Can can we help by enhancing your life? You find flow that includes the meteor. Can we help be helping that spirit have that experience?
And the human spirit, before I go on to the next question, is also an amazing thing in terms of what it is that that particular soul can bring to the world, to society, if they can say, okay, the meteor showed up. I didn't know what to do with it at first. Now I've incorporated and integrated it, and
And
now
then,
I'm ready.
yes, and Angelina, let me offer a hint on this incredibly complex problem of receiving a meteor and integrating it. The most successful people I've known in my practice, and every single client, by the way, I've represented has had an integration problem. Everyone. Who did best? Who did best were those who said to me, Mr. Hughes, something has happened here in my life. Here, this is meteor, however it was defined. And I think I need to ask you if you would take care of it for me for a few years, because I need to pause and consider what's happened, not just run right off my life. So I would you help me with that? And let me be assure you, I'm not looking away. I'm not running away from this. I'm pausing because I need to finish some other things I was doing. And then I'm going to come back to you, and I'd like you to then help me learn everything I need to learn about me with this in my life, and then get back into the river of my life. They have done really well. Pause is one of the greatest gifts a human being can receive when something has happened that knocks them out of the river of their lives. Of course, that's true. And where we all know this, and it's a sad thing to say, but failure to grieve when we lose a person, failure to mourn, MOURN, only means we're going to have to do it anyway in a less satisfactory way. We all know that. So we say to somebody who's lost a loved one, are you grieving? Not out of sympathy. No. Are you doing the work? Are you pausing? Did you pause? Did you stop and say, I need to think of this experience with the understanding eventually I must get back in the river of my life. Yes, this is human.
Yeah, I think it's important that you're speaking about the pause because there is something about regrouping. Yeah, we can't just forever think I'm going to go this morning and get my Starbucks cup of coffee or whatever that caffeine is in that morning and get right back onto that mouse wheel and just run, 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 run. There are moments, weddings and funerals that cause us to reflect and think and regroup and ask ourselves those universal questions of who do we be? Who do we get to be? Who do we want to be?
Yes. And do we give ourselves, in the beautiful way you've just said that, including in that, do we give ourselves the right to pause? Hmm. That's a really interesting question, isn't it? And so important.
I wondered if I could ask the following question for a popcorn type of brief answer. Would you share a story, anonymous, of course, where a member of the rising generation stepped into their voice and changed the trajectory of their family's legacy?
Um, I'm not going to make this anonymous because I think there is a wonderful story in our world of the story of John D. Rockefeller Jr. First of all, I'm a junior. It's not easy to be a junior. My father was the best lawyer I ever met. I've been a lousy lawyer, and I'm junior, so okay, I have his name. But he was also a great, great teacher, and I honor that tremendously. What's the story here, Angelina? Well, it was in a series of meetings. John D. Rockefeller Jr., who was the only son of his mother and father's marriage, he had four sisters. His father was the most successful man on earth, along with Carnegie and Mellon and a few Europeans. And he was expected as the male at that in the 1880s, 90s, zero aughts, and 1910s, teens, to go on the boards of all of the Standard Oil companies and the other companies, oil, iron companies, and others that his father had founded. Why? Well, because his father retired at 50. So the natural thing was the son obligation, go on all the boards. Well, the son and the father were having a conversation, and I think it's also interesting to know that most of those conversations took place at a place called Kykuit, I won't spell it, which is the home on the Hudson River. You can visit that home if somebody would like to. That Junior made for his parents. He built them a home. Isn't that interesting? A beautiful, it's a very livable home. It's not an ostentatious house. Like the Rockefellers, it's not ostentatious. So they're having a series of conversations. I made it one in the first book I wrote, Family Wealth, to make it an easier story. And so what happens? So here is Junior sitting with his father, and he says, Father, I need to have a conversation with you. And father says, Sure, what's up? And he says, Dad, I need to have a conversation with you about my life and how I want to live my life. Father says, Great. What's up, Junior? Said, Well, Dad, I would like to leave the family businesses. Yes, the father says, and I would like to spend my life doing, growing a great family and doing philanthropy. Now comes the great creative, generative, big word, generative action. The father says, Then of course you must do that, because that's what I did. I retired at 50. And and then says something even more generative. Will you help me with my philanthropy? All against all the odds. Not you don't have any choice. You have to live my life to stay on the boards. You're the Rockefeller. No. Now, for the reason I'm telling that story at the end of today's conversation is this. When people say, tell me more, I say, okay, if you ever give yourself permission to go to Fifth Avenue, to go to the Rockefeller Center to watch the skaters and have lunch and that beautiful setting, or at Christmas time with the tree, give yourself permission in front of Saks to walk across Fifth Avenue and walk down the Grand Allée, which goes sort of slowly down toward the skating rink. Just before the skating rink, you will find a book open in bronze. And on that bronze is John D. Rockefeller Jr.'s philosophy about growing a great family and doing philanthropy right there. And when you're there, you see the generativity of the father saying, You must do that. I will help you. You see the generativity of the father saying, Would you help me this way? Because you know more about it than I do. And then you can also recognize that John D. Rockefeller Jr. in part built Rockefeller Center to give jobs to people in the middle of the Depression. Hmm. I think if you start with that kind of generative story, you might very well grow a great family.
He gave his son wings to fly.
Isn't it extraordinary?
Hmm. In contrast to the example you brought up before earlier about Edsel Ford.
And that's in my book, Ford and Rockefeller.
Hmm.
Look at the picture. Look at the experience. What do you want? Their two pictures meant their selves tells you everything you want to know.
And I will check out that book, Titan, that you had recommended in our preamble today. Yeah. I know that we've got to draw our second interview to a close. Is there a piece of advice that you would like to give to any inheritors out there that might feel overwhelmed to close us out?
Speak, exercise your voice, speak, and speak who you are. Let the world know who you are and how it can help you be that. Namaste.
Wonderful, wonderful. I'd like to circle us back to the start of our intention at the beginning of today's episode. We started out with the question of what if the integration of energy could be incorporated into the design of your legacy, whether you're the giver or the receiver. And I think we have fulfilled that business promise today. And there were so many good nuggets about, the honor culture, whether that's in South America, in the Middle East, etc. And, if you take someone's voice, you take their face and you make them a ghost as a metaphor, as well as the role that Athena played in challenging Telemachus and who are you becoming? And realizing that one of the best questions to ask is how is it that you are enhancing others' lives more than assets under management? So I appreciate your time again this morning, Mr. Hughes. And I'm going to just say thank you again before I read my
Thank you.
closing paragraph.
A great joy and wonderful experience. Thank you.
My pleasure. In
Bye-bye.
closing, in closing, I'm Angelina Carleton, the hostess of the Design Your Legacy podcast, as well as the founder of The Legacy Planning, a boutique advisory firm based out of Beverly Hills, California, but international in those I coach. I hope to dive deep into subjects that can help a person define, develop, and execute their legacy, and continue to scour the landscape for those who can be great resources to every dimension of your legacy. For many listeners and/or viewers, there can never be enough education and preparation in the moot or moat around your castle. Whether you find yourself with new wealth or generational wealth, may the content on this channel be an anchor in any storms ahead. We do our best to provide original content for your intellectual and emotional curiosity. If you're tuning in today on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, etc., YouTube, please remember to rate and review, share with your family and friends. And if you feel so inclined, send an email to either Jay Hughes or myself. Let us know your thoughts and feelings about today's episode. So thank you so much for joining, and thank you, Jay Hughes, for being a guest once again.